Onyami Jesus is still my name.
Air heavy.
Hey,
The camera's rolling.
you're a Hollywood actor and they are top content
The air
creator.
heavy. The camera's rolling. When suddenly, a 67-year-old woman strides in and declares, imagine a tense Finnish courtroom. The air heavy. The camera's rolling. When suddenly, a 67-year-old woman strides in and declares, I am Simon Ekpa's mother. The room freezes. Whispers erupt. How could that be possible when the world knows his mother is long dead? Within minutes, the mystery unravels, and the truth stuns everyone. She is Lolo Amarachi from Afikpo, the aunt who raised him like her own, the woman who kept him disciplined, educated, and unbroken in a Nigeria that tried to silence Biafrans. But this was no sentimental reunion. This was a public battle for Simon's freedom. Armed with photos, documents, and stories of how he built clean water projects for the poor, she shattered the image painted by his enemies. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, whispers of political deals swirl, with claims that releasing Nnamdi Kanu could sway the 2027 elections. At the same time, billions are pledged to revive Onitsha's river port, while the Biafra Liberation Army faces rebranding backlash. This is more than a legal twist. It's a clash of truth, politics, and survival that spans continents. The question now is, whose narrative will the world believe? A woman claiming to be Simon Ekpa's mother unexpectedly appeared at the Päijät-Häme District Court in Finland to testify in his favor. Her claim surprised many because Simon Ekpa's biological mother is deceased, a fact Simon Ekpa himself confirmed in earlier court statements. The woman, identified as 67-year-old Lolo Amarachi from Afikpo, Ebonyi State, in southeastern Nigeria, now known as Biafra land, explained she is Simon Ekpa's late mother's sister and raised him from a young age. She described herself as a retired school principal known for discipline and community service. In court, she defended Simon Ekpa's character, citing his history of helping people and involvement in local projects. She presented photos and documents of development projects Simon Ekpa supported, including constructing a free borehole in his community. The court reacted positively, noting that in Western countries, such selfless acts are highly valued. This testimony briefly disrupted proceedings because her initial claim of being Simon Ekpa's mother caused confusion before clarification. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, an article published online in Hausa language suggested President Bola Tinubu could win Southeast votes in 2027 by releasing Nnamdi Kanu. The article claimed releasing Nnamdi Kanu would boost APC support in the Southeast, especially in Anambra State. However, Nnamdi Kanu lawyer Aloy Ejimakor released an 18-minute video to the UN, ICC, ECOWAS, and others about Nnamdi Kanu's October 10, 2025 no-case submission in Abuja. In Anambra, new investors, Universal Elysium Consortium, plan to invest billions of naira in developing the Onitsha River Port. The port recently received goods via a barge, not a ship, prompting explanations on barge operations. However, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United States of Biafra, USB, Dr. Ngozi Orebweze, sent an open letter to President Bola Tinubu, demanding Nigerian troops withdraw from Biafra territory. USB recently launched an online radio station, but public criticism grew because it currently plays only music instead of news and programs. USB also announced a rebranding of its Biafra Liberation Army, sparking backlash from supporters online. The story unfolding here begins with an unexpected and emotionally charged scene in a Finnish courtroom, one that caught not only the court, but also observers off guard. In the middle of the ongoing legal battles of Simon Yoku Ekpa, a woman walked into the Päijät-Häme District Court, claiming to be his mother. This instantly stirred murmurs of surprise because the court and public record both acknowledged that Simon Ekpa's biological mother had long passed away, a fact Simon himself had openly admitted in previous sessions. Her appearance, her confident introduction, and her insistence on defending Simon's character immediately became the most talked about moment of the day, overshadowing even some of the prosecution's earlier arguments. But as the situation unfolded, her claim was clarified. She was not his birth mother, but his late mother's sister, a woman who had practically raised him after his mother's death. Her name was given as Lolo Amarachi, a 67-year-old from Afikpo in Ebonyi State, deep in the southeastern region of Nigeria, the same region Biafrans insist on calling Biafra land. The cultural meaning of her presence could not be understated. In Igbo tradition, an aunt who raises a child often becomes nne, a second mother, not by blood, but by bond. To her, claiming the role of Simon's mother was not a deception, but a declaration of a lifelong relationship. She had been the one who ensured he stayed disciplined, educated and respectful in a Nigeria that had long denied Biafrans their rightful dignity. Her own background as a retired school principal lent her an air of authority, and her composure under questioning reflected decades of public service and personal sacrifice. When she began speaking in Simon's defense, her words painted a picture that was the complete opposite of the image Nigerian authorities and some foreign media had tried to project. She described a man devoted to helping others, committed to community progress, and unwilling to stand idle while injustice reigned. She did not just rely on her words. She brought evidence, photographs, and official documents showing Simon's role in local development projects. One example that stood out was his funding of a free borehole in their community, a project that delivered clean water to people who had been neglected by both state and federal governments for decades. In Finland and across most Western nations, such acts of public good carry significant moral weight. The courtroom mood shifted. Even some who had been skeptical could not dismiss the fact that Simon had invested in people's welfare without seeking personal gain. The brief disruption caused by her initial mother claim actually helped bring more attention to her testimony. Once clarified, the court seemed more inclined to view her as a credible and important witness. This was not just an emotional appeal, it was a challenge to the narrative that had been constructed against Simon, the narrative that painted him solely as a dangerous agitator. Meanwhile, events back in Nigeria added another layer to the day's political and legal drama. An article published online in Hausa language, clearly targeting a northern Nigerian audience, made a surprising suggestion. It claimed that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu could win southeast votes in the 2027 general elections if here, on the surface, might sound like a political masterstroke to some in Abuja, but to Biafrans, it reveals a cynical truth. The Nigerian political establishment still sees their lives, freedoms and leaders as bargaining chips in a political game. Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, remains in detention despite multiple court rulings declaring his arrest illegal. His lawyer, Aloy Ejimakor, continues to fight both in Nigerian courts and on the international stage. On this same day, Ejimakor released an 18-minute video presentation to global institutions, including the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, and ECOWAS. In it, he outlined the plan for Nnamdi Kanu's no-case submission, scheduled for October 10th, 2025, in Abuja. A hearing that could potentially force the Nigerian judiciary to confront the complete lack of evidence against him. The stakes are high, not only for Nnamdi Kanu's freedom, but for the legitimacy of Nigeria's entire justice system. Away from the political prisoners' trials, other developments in Biafra land reflected both the region's potential and the continued interference from Nigerian authorities. In Anambra State, investors under the name Universal Elysium Consortium announced plans to inject billions of naira into developing the Onitsha River port. Recently, the port had received goods via a barge rather than a ship, prompting discussions about the efficiency and limitations of river transport in a region still suffering from deliberate infrastructure neglect. To Biafrans, this kind of investment could mean jobs, economic independence, and a stronger local economy, all of which the Nigerian government has historically resisted in order to maintain control over the southeast. At the same time, tensions between the United States of Biafra, USB, government in exile, and Nigeria flared once again. Dr. Ngozi Orebweze, the Deputy Prime Minister of USB, sent an open letter to President Tinubu demanding an immediate withdrawal of Nigerian military forces from Biafra territory. Her demand was rooted in decades of military occupation that has brought killings, disappearances, and intimidation to ordinary Biafran civilians. USB also launched a new online radio station, a move intended to spread news, information, and unity among Biafrans worldwide. However, the station initially came under criticism from supporters because it played only music instead of urgent news bulletins. Adding to the mixed public reaction was USB's announcement of a rebranding of the Biafra Liberation Army. While the leadership framed it as a strategic and symbolic step to strengthen the liberation struggle, some supporters online accused the leadership of abandoning the original spirit of the armed defense movement. All of these events, the Finnish courtroom testimony, the political games around Nnamdi Kanu's freedom, the economic developments in Onitsha, and the strategic shifts within USB, are threads in a much larger tapestry. At the center of it is the decades-long historical injustice faced by the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria. Since the end of the Biafran War in 1970, the Nigerian government has maintained a policy of marginalization, whether through exclusion from key federal appointments, deliberate underdevelopment of infrastructure, or military occupation of Biafran towns. Massacres, arbitrary arrests, and targeted killings of Igbo activists have been documented repeatedly by human rights organizations, yet justice has never been served. The persecution of Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu cannot be separated from this history. Both men have become symbols of resistance, voices that refuse to be silenced even when subjected to state propaganda, legal harassment, and character assassination. The testimony of someone like Lolo Amarachi in a Finnish courtroom is not just a personal defense of Simon, it is a challenge to decades of Nigerian state narratives that portray Biafran leaders as criminals rather than freedom fighters. The possible solutions to this crisis are clear to anyone willing to look honestly at the history. Unconditional release of all Biafran political prisoners, withdrawal of Nigerian troops from Biafra land, recognition of the right to self-determination, and reparations for the countless lives lost and properties destroyed during and after the war. Yet, judging by the Nigerian government's actions, these solutions remain far away. Abuja continues to rely on force, deception, and political manipulation rather than genuine dialogue. But the struggle continues. In courtrooms in Finland, in detention cells in Abuja, in the ports of Onitsha, and in the voices on Biafran radio. For the Biafran people, each testimony, each political statement, and each act of resistance is part of an unbroken chain linking today's fight to the sacrifices of the past. The Nigerian government may see Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu as threats, but to Biafrans, they are sons of the land, voices speaking truth in the face of oppression. The day at the Päijät-Häme District Court in Finland began, like many others, in the ongoing case of Simon Njoku Ekpa, but it quickly took a dramatic turn that no one saw coming. What had been expected to be a routine session of legal arguments suddenly transformed into a deeply emotional, almost theatrical moment that would be remembered by everyone in attendance. The courtroom was already tense when the doors opened, and a woman stepped in. She was dressed in a modest but neat attire that reflected the elegance of a woman who had lived with dignity and carried herself with quiet pride. She walked forward without hesitation, her steps measured but confident, her gaze steady as she approached the witness stand. Then, in a calm but firm voice, she introduced herself to the court as the mother of Simon Ekpa. The reaction was immediate. There were murmurs from observers, raised eyebrows from the legal teams, and a momentary pause from the judge. This was not just because the claim was unexpected, but because everyone present knew that Simon's biological mother had passed away years ago. Simon himself had confirmed this in earlier court statements. The sudden appearance of a woman claiming to be his mother was, to put it mildly, startling. The presiding judge, clearly concerned about clarity, asked her to explain herself. It was then that the truth emerged, a truth that carried both cultural and emotional weight. Her name was Lolo Amarachi, and she was not Simon's birth mother, but the younger sister of his late mother. In Igbo tradition, the role of a mother is not confined to biological boundaries. A woman who raises a child, feeds them, disciplines them, and guides them through life is just as much a mother as the one who gave birth. For Lolo Amarachi, this was not a matter of legal definition, but of lived reality. She told the court that after Simon's mother died, she stepped in to raise him as her own. She described her years as a school principal in Afikpo, Ebonyi State, a region in southeastern Nigeria that Biafrans proudly refer to as Biafra land. Her career had been defined by discipline, moral guidance, and a commitment to building young minds. She brought these same values into Simon's life, ensuring he grew up with a sense of justice, responsibility, and service to others. Then she spoke about his character. This was not the Simon Ekpa painted by Nigerian government propaganda as a dangerous separatist and troublemaker. This was a man who had gone out of his way to help those around him, even when it meant spending his own money or putting himself at personal risk. She brought with her photographs and official documents to prove it. Evidence of development projects Simon had funded, including a free borehole that provided clean water to their community. For decades, the Nigerian government had neglected to provide such basic infrastructure, yet Simon had stepped in where the state had failed. In Finland and in much of the Western world, such acts of community service are not taken lightly. They reflect values of civic duty and humanitarian concern, the very qualities that many in the courtroom had perhaps not associated with Simon before. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Even those in attendance who might have been indifferent to his plight now had to confront a fuller, more human picture of the man on trial. The initial confusion over her claim of being his mother was quickly resolved, but in truth, the moment of disruption may have worked in Simon's favor. It drew attention, made people listen, and set the stage for her testimony to resonate even more powerfully. Her words became not just a personal defense of Simon, but a cultural lesson for those unfamiliar with Biafran family bonds and community values. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away in Nigeria, political games were being played around another central figure of the Biafran struggle, Nnamdi Kanu. An article published online in Hausa language suggested that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu could win votes in the southeast during the 2027 elections by releasing Kanu. This was a stunning admission of how cynically Nigerian politics treats Biafran lives. It revealed that in the minds of the ruling elite, the unlawful detention of a man like Kanu, whose only crime is advocating for the freedom of his people, could be used as a political bargaining chip. An article published online in Hausa language suggested that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu could win votes in the southeast during the 2027 elections by releasing Kanu. This was a stunning admission of how cynically Nigerian politics treats Biafran lives. It revealed that in the minds of the ruling elite, the unlawful detention of a man like Kanu, whose only crime is advocating for the freedom of his people, could be used as a political bargaining chip. Kanu's lawyer, Barrister Aloy Ejimakor, was having none of it. On that same day, he released an 18-minute video addressed to international bodies, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, ECOWAS, and others, outlining the upcoming no-case submission set for October 10, 2025, in Abuja. This hearing could be a decisive moment, one where the Nigerian judiciary will either be forced to admit it has no evidence against Kanu or continue to expose itself as an instrument of political oppression. This is not just a legal battle. It is part of a much longer history, a history that began long before Simon Ekpa was born, before Nnamdi Kanu was old enough to speak. It is the history of Biafra's persecution. Since the end of the brutal Nigerian Biafran War in 1970, the Igbo people and other Biafrans have lived under systemic marginalization. Roads are left to decay, industries are deliberately starved of investment, federal appointments are denied, and the region is militarized under the pretext of security operations. The Nigerian army's record in the southeast is stained with the blood of unarmed protesters, youth and women. From the massacres in Aba and Onitsha to the killings in Unkpor and Emene, the message has been consistent. Biafran lives do not matter to the Nigerian state. Even economic development in the region is often seen as a threat by Abuja. In Anambra State, the recent announcement by Universal Elysium Consortium to invest billions of naira into the Onitsha River Port project could bring thousands of jobs and boost trade. Yet the port's recent operations were limited to receiving goods via a barge rather than direct shipping, a reminder of how federal policy constrains Biafran potential. In this tense atmosphere, the government in exile of the United States of Biafra, led by figures like Dr. Ngozi Orebweze, continues to push for sovereignty and international recognition. Dr. Orebweze's open letter to President Tinubu demanding the withdrawal of Nigerian troops from Biafra territory was a direct challenge to decades of occupation. USB's launch of a new online radio station was meant to connect Biafrans worldwide, but it immediately drew criticism for airing only music instead of urgent news and programs. To make matters more complex, USB's decision to rebrand the Biafra Liberation Army triggered backlash from sections of the movement's supporters. While the leadership described it as a strategic reorganization, others saw it as a dilution of the armed resistance spirit that had been central to defending communities from Nigerian military brutality. The intertwining of these stories, a surprise courtroom testimony in Finland, a political maneuver in Nigeria over Kanu's freedom, economic investment in Onitsha, and strategic shifts in the Biafran liberation struggle, is a reminder that the Biafran question is not confined to one courtroom or one leader. It is global, historical, and deeply personal. The Nigerian government and its military might continue to rely on force, propaganda, and manipulation, but the testimonies of people like Lolo Amarachi, the defiance of lawyers like Aloy Ejimakor, and the persistence of leaders like Seaman Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu ensure that the truth is not buried. Each trial, each protest, each act of community development is a stone in the foundation of a free Biafra. And while the road to that freedom may still be long, moments like the one in that Finnish courtroom remind the world that behind the headlines and the politics are real human beings, people bound by history, love, and an unshakable belief in their right to live as free Biafrans in their own land.